Honestly unbalanced.
You started teaching kind of an inordinate amount of like local classes, like in-person local classes. And
Mhm.
I think you said you identified that that wasn't sustainable. And
Mhm.
early on, you looked for an alternative way to like make money. And I think so many people only realize that like 30 years later. They spend all that time like teaching 20 classes a week and then think, oh, maybe I'll do a YouTube after all
Yeah.
that time. And of course, nothing ever happens.
Mm.
Uh, but you identified a shift early. Now, before we talk about that shift, I'd love to talk about how it affected you, perhaps, not teaching in a community, but turning your community to online. Like, was there a teaching yoga anywhere is quite lonely, to be honest, even if you are teaching physically,
Mm.
because it's the community is quite fleeting, especially if you're in a big city. But can you describe the difference between the online stuff and the in-person stuff, and do you miss anything about the in-person stuff?
Mm. I think because I was always quite introverted and I always found it quite difficult and quite heavy to speak to so many people day to day. So many people offload things right before a
Mm.
yoga class. They meet you, they say hi, and then, they say, oh, this is going on in my life recently. And then you have that conversation 20 or 30 times a day with different people, and it becomes quite a lot. So by the end of the day, you're like, wow, I feel like I just took on so much stuff of other people's. So I think being quite introverted, that used to weigh heavily on me. So going online felt a little bit lighter.
Mm.
The interactions were, there was a boundary there that was easier for me to protect my own peace, my own energy, and I found it easier. I do still teach just one class in my hometown, which allows me to still have that connection with the community. And I love that. And I can put everything into that one class, but then also I can retreat and go back to the online where I have my boundaries. I can decide how many comments to get back to and things like that. So I found having that balance made it easier for me because, like you say, I used to teach way too many classes at a very young age and I found it way too much. And I just never saw me doing that for a really long time. I didn't think there was much longevity there.
Did you ever find a solution in the time that you were teaching that much in person to protecting yourself and encouraging people to not share their lives with you like you were a very low paid counselor?
Yeah, that's a really good way to describe it. Yeah. No, no, I didn't because I'm the type of person where I like to listen. I like to hear about people's lives. I like to check in with people, but checking in with people, that doesn't mean that there's people don't always have a filter to how much they share with you. You might just say, how are you doing? And then before you know it, you've got someone's life story. And it's like, whoa, okay. I wasn't expecting so much. I just asked
Mm.
you how your day was. So I never found that where you could be polite and respectful and say, oh, just give me the highlights, just give me instead of everything that's going on in your life. So no. And I think what you said about being a low pay counselor is so true of yoga teachers, where people do treat yoga teachers as almost like a therapy session.
And to be honest, I think people do that with the hairdresser as well, and their PT,
Yeah,
and the
yeah,
like. But I
true.
think yoga teachers, especially,
Mm-hmm.
because people kind of put, but you can perhaps people put their yoga teacher, for better or worse, for right or wrong, on a pedestal more than they would perhaps
Mm-hmm.
their PT. And I think your issue is you got a friendly face as well. And I don't have that issue. So people never really. I've been looking. Maybe it's a male thing. Maybe it's a aggressive face, heavy eyebrow thing. But people never really shared stuff with me until far later in the game. Like if they want to retreat with me, they would.
Mm-hmm.
Or once they've realised I'm not the person that I look like, and then they start to speak to me more, and I enjoy that. But I have a nice physical barrier. I think to that. And do you find though on your online stuff that you still have a connection with individuals? I'm not sure how much you do live stream. I know you've got a lot of pre-recorded courses, your YouTube, etc. Like, do you feel that there is a connection you have with anyone that you meet online?
There are a number of people where I know them personally by name, and I've had a relationship with them for years. It was easier back in the day where the community was smaller. It was easier for me to keep track of people and to have those closer connections. Nowadays, it's a little bit more challenging, but I do still remember the same usernames that pop up. I still recognize them. And over the years, I get to know their names. I get to know the things that they enjoy. If they come and join me for a program, then I get to know them on more of a personal level. So there is still that. It is possible online.
And have you ever met people in person that you've never met before and they just watch your videos and they just come out of the blue in a shopping centre or like and give you a hug, etc.?
No,
It's
no,
not happened yet.
that hasn't happened to me yet. No, no. I actually don't want that to happen. I quite like my anonymity. I hope that I can just stay undercover.
I think it will.
Um,
It will happen at some point. You'll be at an airport and someone,
maybe.
and that's it. The weird thing perhaps with being online like that is that people really feel like they know you. There are people in the world that you've
Mm.
never met that you might have taught them daily yoga for the last 300 days.
Yeah.
And they follow you on
Mm-hmm.
social media and they feel like they really do kind of like intimately know you quite well.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, how did that feel?
I try not to think about that anymore. Yeah, yeah. My mom will say to me sometimes, do you know how many people sometimes my mom's really interested in how many subscribers I have on YouTube because for her it's really exciting. And she'll say, do you know how many people that would be if you were to see them all? And I was like, I know, I don't. I try not to think about it because that's crazy. Um, but yeah, I know what you mean. Sometimes I will get comments from people and they'll say, I think I spend more time with you than my partner because you're on in my living room on the TV every day.
You've developed lots of skills yourself, haven't you? I know you had a slight like tech
Mm-hmm.
background anyway in terms of what you
Mm-hmm.
what you studied at uni.
Mm-hmm.
Because to create a YouTube account, well, even just social media account full stop,
Mm-hmm.
and for it to do well, you need kind of a lot of knowledge and skill, or at least that or someone that you're paying to do that. But from
Yeah.
what I understand, you taught yourself most of it.
Yeah.
And that
Mm-hmm.
perhaps is a big gap between people that say they want to do something and do it well and people that
Mm-hmm.
actually do it well. Some of it's luck and chance, but a lot of it is like, are you willing to make an investment
Mm-hmm.
in like, financially, as in you want to invest in the mics, the cameras, the lighting, or skill, the skills required to edit the videos and the like. Has that always been your approach to everything you do in life? Like going all in, invest time and money, just go for it? Or was there something particularly unique about what you thought yoga could offer you in that sense?
No, I'd say I'm quite all in with anything that I've ever wanted to do in my life. So I've had quite a lot of hobbies growing up. For example, I taught myself how to make clothes um, years and years ago. And I bought a sewing machine. I went out and started buying all of the materials, watching YouTube videos, and went all in with that. And this is back in the early days of my Instagram, and I would make yoga outfits
Oh
and then I
wow.
could I could document my practice and then also share what I'd made. And I always treat anything that I do where if I'm doing it, I'm doing it well and I'm doing it to the best of my ability. And that is a standard that I hold myself to. So that's just my approach with anything that I do. And before my YouTube channel really took off, I was a I used to make leather seats for classic cars. So I was an
Okay.
upholsterer. Yeah, it's quite a niche thing. And it's one of those jobs where everything is done to the millimeter, to the exacting detail that it needs to be done, because you're replicating the way something was in the past. And I try to take that approach with everything that I do to treat it as if there is an exacting standard for everything. And I think that's how you create a really reliable experience for people, especially with YouTube, because it's so important that people know what they're getting from each video and people really want that. Why like franchises work so well because people go to Starbucks because they know every time they're going to get the same coffee. I think people really enjoy YouTubers or wherever it is that they get their media from, because they know they're going to get the same experience each time.
Bikram
So
and Ashtanga. That's why Bikram and Ashtanga did so well for so long.
yes,
The
yeah,
McDonald's of yoga.
yeah, it's one way to think of it. Yeah.
And then, so what, when you decided on YouTube, who was your initial inspiration? I guess Yoga for Adrienne was always there, was like the big name that's done so well,
Mm,
but she got there. So I think sometimes when you look at someone for inspiration, you need to not look at someone that's so far ahead of you in a sense, but also someone that didn't start a decade before you as well.
yeah.
Because
Uh-huh.
someone that started in that sense a decade before you and then has like, I don't know, 10 million followers or like whatever she might have, all the rules that she had to follow are completely different for you. So you can't actually almost be, you can't follow the lead in that sense, can you? Because
Mm,
everything was so different for someone like her
mm-hmm,
compared to you
mm-hmm,
starting it in 2023 or like. But yes,
mm.
who was your inspiration or where did you go for guidance?
Well, my practice started on YouTube with Boho Beautiful. I'm not sure if you're familiar with their
Yeah.
channel, but I started practicing with Juliana. Um, but I've never looked to their channel for something that I wanted to replicate, because again, they were so far ahead of me, like you say. So I've always looked for teachers with specific skill sets. Either their cueing was really clear, or their camera work was top quality, or I tried to take inspiration from all of these different things and then bring all of these skills together and package it in a way that was my own. So for example, that there's a couple of creators. Move with Nicole is great. She's more Pilates based. She's really big on YouTube. But then I also look to other creators who are not in the wellness fitness space, but they just create really great videos. Maybe it's their cinematography that I look at, or just their camera presence. There I'm not sure what her channel used to be. Her name is Sorel. She's Australian, but she's someone that I used to look to learn how to be comfortable on the camera. She did a video once about sticking a photo of a family member to the camera. So when you were talking to the camera, it was like you were addressing your family member instead of this awkward camera that is faceless. And learning things like that really helped, because in the early days, it's so awkward talking to a camera, but now it's like a best friend.
Hmm.
Mm.
I think that's really important to actually get inspiration from other places that
Mm.
aren't like, and for social media, like that's where most of my inspiration comes from, not yoga teachers. But I have three accounts. I have my Honestly Balanced account, I have
Mm.
the Adam Hustler account, and then I have my photography one. And photography isn't my business, although I make some money from it. But the people I follow on that account, who nothing to do with yoga or fitness, I get so entertained by them, inspired by them. That's where I save lots of stuff that then I can think, well, I can do that, but in a yoga way. In a
Mm-hmm.
yoga way. I think that's so, so,
Mm-hmm.
so valuable.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned there the camera work. Like most people that aren't familiar with filming stuff, and certainly like the average yoga teacher, wouldn't even know where to begin. Like what that even means, their camera work. I think for most people, the idea is you get a tripod, you get a camera, you put it on it, and you just talk. Did you have, were you particularly interested in film before? Like, where did this analytical background
Uh,
come from?
no, acquired all of these skills out of necessity. In the beginning, I had such a simple setup, but because I've always been such a stickler for quality and trying to improve, I would look at whatever it was that I'd taken, I'd sort of critique it, and I'd try to improve on that. And then the next time I would repeat this process, trying to do the best of my ability, then critique it, and then try to look at ways that I can improve. And I've spent so many hours over the years watching YouTube tutorials, trying to go away and learn the technical side of it, because in the early days, I couldn't afford for a videographer to come and spend a day with me. I couldn't afford for an editor, so I had to do it myself. And I always advise anyone else to go and do that, because if you're going to pay someone to do that for you, you need to understand what you're asking that person to do. And if you've not walked in their shoes, then how can you understand?
Are you starting to outsource now then, or are you still doing it all yourself?
Yeah, no, I only just got an editor quite recently, because it has gotten too big for me. And as I want to start taking things further, I was looking at it like you're a crazy person if you try and do this yourself. I used to think it was quite a noble thing to do everything yourself, like it was something to be proud of. And then I realized actually that's not the case if it means that you're burning yourself out trying to do all of
Mm.
these jobs. You need a life outside of work as well.
And I think it's especially hard when things aren't making money initially. I know I'm sure you are now on YouTube,
Mm,
but I think when you're newer to something, let's say even like a podcast, for instance, the podcast, this podcast doesn't make loads of money, and
mm,
I feel that I should still continue to do everything myself. And the idea of spending money on someone to edit it for me and do the graphics, etc., feels very like, oh no, I don't want to do that because it's not the thing isn't making enough money to justify that.
mm, mm,
Whereas actually, for me, like if I step back, I would probably think actually the podcast can probably grow exponentially if I just let go of a few things and
mm,
take that loss for a while and just let someone else deal with that. But
mm,
I think it's a very normal thing for someone to feel that they should do everything themselves until the thing is making loads of money. When in
mm.
fact, to get to the money making thing, maybe actually you need to take that risk initially.
Yeah, yeah. A really interesting take. I'm not sure if you've ever read the book. It's called The E-Myth.
No.
It's the entrepreneurial myth. But in it, it talks about how people often get stuck working in their business instead of on their business.
Mm,
And this was the eye opener for me recently when I thought, oh, yes, I'm actually so stuck working in the business, i.e., doing the day to day editing, that I don't have time to work on the business, i.e., developing other skills that make me better at what I do. And I started to think, actually, well, what would benefit the business and everything else more is if I freed up this space. So I think that's one way that you can justify it too.
what are the skills that you're looking to work on yourself then now?
So a big one is I've been learning Spanish for several years.
Okay.
Yeah, so I want to start teaching yoga in Spanish.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
that's a really big one for me. Another one as well, something I'm moving into and have been for a little while now, is to start working with other yoga teachers, to help them learn the skills that I've learned. So I often do coaching calls with yoga teachers where they'll come to me and they'll say, look, I need help with my marketing. I need help with my content creation, my videography, editing, you name it. And I coach them and help them with things like this. But one of the things I'm moving into is I realize that there are yoga trainings that teach you how to be a yoga teacher, but they don't teach you how to do the things that you need to do to be able to make it a viable business or career. You come out of the training and sure you can teach, but you don't really know how to create a business out of teaching. So that is what I want to start helping people with.
Nice, 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 nice. And let's reverse back to then the creation of the YouTube
Mm.
and the skills required initially. What was your first big risk you took in terms of equipment or time learning a skill?
Um, I don't see it as a risk, but I guess you could say so, was probably starting to invest in hiring places to film. So I often film in other countries nowadays because I like to film outside, and being based in England, we do not have the luxury of reliable weather. So I will go and hire a place, say in Spain or Italy. So there is a very big cost attached to that. And then I need
Mm.
to make sure that I can then make that money back and then hopefully make a little bit more to have for myself. So that was one of the big risk takers for me. But then I
That,
also think,
I was
go
going to say, I
ahead.
like that as a way to expense holidays. That's quite a good tactic. Just say, well, I'm going on a holiday to create content.
Yeah.
And it is a 7 day content creation break. There is no personal benefit attached to that at all. I love it. I might do that.
Yeah, you could, yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted. So that was but that is a risk anyway. Although it's a risk with lots of side
Mm,
benefits to it. It is certainly a
Yeah.
financial risk.
Yeah. Um, and then the other thing I guess is just the time it's taken to acquire these skills, having to say no to, plans, staying at home, maybe not going out when I wanted to because I was just so focused on learning the skills that I needed to learn to get better. So it's not a risk, but it is a sacrifice. I would say there's probably been more
Oh, I like
sacrifices
that. I
than
like that. That's a
risks.
nice way to put it. Okay.
Mm.
And what made you decide to film in rented spaces? Did you ever think? Because most people naturally would film at their home and then
Mm.
eventually make a room in their house nicer that becomes a kind of a more permanent space.
Yeah,
Then
yeah.
and maybe at a push then create a garden studio or just rent consistently a physical location that's then
Mm.
their space. What
Mm.
made you decide to go on a different route of just traveling?
I mean, I love to travel, so I guess you could say it's for selfish reasons. But also, I love to take the classes outside. And I like the fact that it's always changing, it's always different. It makes it exciting for me as a creator. I think it makes it interesting for people doing the classes. Having the sounds of nature as well adds another element to it that I think is really enjoyable for people. And when I used to film at home, I used to have so many issues. I live in quite a creaky house.
Okay.
There's lots of walls with sort of intricate roofs. So there would always be issues with reverb. And I just thought, I'm always coming up against problems here. Why not take it outside where, I'm not up against all of these issues and I get to work with a different set of circumstances.
You must have had some kind of horror stories there doing it outside. You might not have a creaky roof, but you might have like creaky weirdos and dogs and planes and a like. Like, has there been any
Um,
absolute
I mean,
horrors?
filming outside is not easy. There's so many things that you can't control. The wind is always the worst issue because
Mm.
it gets in the microphone, it creates that horrible rumble. I mean, there's times when I get rained off. There's times when I turn up to a location that I know in my local area and there's something going on there. So I have to just turn around and go back home. That's part of it too, though. There's also times though where completely unexpectedly I will turn up somewhere and it's just perfect. And I think, wow, this is such a lovely moment to capture for people. So it's very offhand in that way as well.
And do you have someone that you take with you to help filming, or is it, or you setting up tripods yourself?
Yeah, it's just me.
I'd even be scared that someone would kind of steal the camera because you need a fair bit of distance unless you go super
You
wide
do.
lens, which is not
Hmm.
desirable. You need quite a bit of distance away from the gear, don't you?
Yeah, you do. I find most of the places that I film in, they're very secluded. Like, I'm not filming anywhere that's busy. That's the point, is to try to get away into the places that are more quiet. I do have people commenting all the time, especially when I'm in the woods. People always worry that there's going to be an animal or a person or something, but I am always careful to make sure that there's no one around. And thankfully, to date, I've not had any dodgy situations. It's been all right.
And this is I guess, a practical question here. Have you ever come up against something where you've had to ask special kind of commercial permissions to film there? Because I guess
Um,
at some point it crosses the line between like you creating personal use content and you
mm,
actually filming as a film location.
yeah, yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, so if I'm hiring an Airbnb, for example, I will always ask the owners. And I haven't had anyone that said no. Most of the time they're really excited and they're like, great, send me the videos once they're on
Nice.
YouTube. I can't wait to see. And then a lot of the time I'm using public space. I did go down the route of looking into some national trust properties, but with national trust being, a big um, entity, you do have to go through a lot of paperwork. There's a lot of red tape attached. So I decided not to go down that route
Yeah.
because it was just adding layers of complexity that I didn't need. I just wanted to be able to turn up and film. So I try to avoid those situations because I'm one person. I don't want the extra admin as well, just so that I can turn up and teach.
I'm impressed it's like a solo endeavor because the amount of like, gear you have to carry,
Oh
including
yeah.
lighting, reflectors, microphones, etc.
Yeah. I actually bought a camping trolley last year, the ones that people use for festivals,
Yeah.
so that I can put all my stuff in there. And then occasionally people will see me and they'll be like, "Where are you going? What are you doing with all this?" I'm quite a small person as well. So people see
Hmm.
me like dragging this big trolley. I think they wonder what I'm doing. But yeah.
Let's put you in the scenario of a kind of a new content creator. What would be the first things that they probably would need to work on? What are they likely doing wrong? Whether that be production, quality, gear, what are they likely doing wrong that could be a quick fix for them to improve what they do?
Mm, I think audio, I would prioritize over video because if your cues are clear, people won't need to look at the video. So, as best you can, try to make the audio as pleasing to the ear as possible. Because if something's visually not nice to look at, you can get over it. But if it's painful to listen to,
Mm.
there's no getting past that. So I always say to people, try to prioritize that over anything else. Um, Other considerations are, especially when you go online, is that your audience is not necessarily going to be native to your area. So sometimes you have to adopt new ways of explaining things that are going to be understood by a worldwide audience. So you might have terminology that you just understand from where you're from. That's your way of saying it. But it can be helpful to think actually, well, does everybody understand this? Like, is this the simplest way to explain this? Another thing I say to people is that online, people really just want a quick solution. So I say to people, just try to keep it fluff free. Get to the point, give your cue, be clear, give helpful information, and then be quiet. Because so many people, they go on and on and on. And I think that's just giving people more opportunity to decide that actually you're not the person for them. They'd rather just go with the other teacher who's going to give minimal cues and give space for silence. So those are my big three, consider your terminology, improve your audio, and be quiet.
The terminology one is big, even in person. I've been lucky enough to teach, a lot around Europe,
Mm,
but I found that early on, when I'd use kind of colloquial language and
yeah.
even just like little terms that you don't even realize they're
Hmm.
regional words, and
Yeah.
everyone just looks at you, like especially from Birmingham. There's certain things I would say, and even people in London didn't know what was going on.
Mm.
So yeah, that's a really, I think that's a really key one. But at the same time, you still, I think, perhaps want to make sure that you get your character across. I
Yeah,
guess because
there
too
is that.
minimal, and it becomes so
It
generic.
becomes, yeah, impersonal. I know what
Mhm.
you mean. It's finding that balance. For me, that works because I'm not the most talkative person, and I've always enjoyed those moments of silence in a practice. So I suppose I took inspiration from what I enjoyed when
Mhm.
I did other classes. And I thought, well, if I enjoy this, it's likely that other people will do too. And I knew the things that turned me off when I did classes online. Like I've done a lot of YouTube. That was how my practice started. So I suppose because I started on YouTube, I really got an insight into what people want when they do a YouTube class, what they're looking for.
And what is it you want from this whole endeavor? What's a long-term game?
Honestly, I feel like I'm there. A few years ago, I would have said my goal is just to have the freedom to be able to have enough time to study, to have enough time to travel, to be the person that dictates my schedule. And I'm in the fortunate position where I can do all of those things. Like, I don't want any more than that. I just want to be able to continue studying, to be able to see parts of the world, and to be able to wake up in the morning and decide when I work and when I don't.
And what does your yoga practice look like at the moment? Is it always reflecting what you're teaching at that time, or is it different perhaps at a time to what you're teaching publicly?
Actually, no, I a lot of what is in the classes is exactly what's going on in my yoga practice. It used to be very different, and I don't know if you experienced the same thing when you first start teaching. Your yoga practice personally is very different to what you teach. And for a while, I taught very safe and I taught what I was comfortable teaching. And then I started to think, well, why don't I teach the way I personally practice? Because I know that that's what I enjoy. So maybe that's what other people are looking for too. So now I try to bring as much of my own practice into what I teach because I think people get bored of the generic sequences. They know them. They're looking for something new.
Yeah, it could be a new thing. Certainly, I think when you're a newer teacher, you feel like you need to replicate
Mm,
100%. And to be fair, when you just qualify, that's all you know. I think it's probably a good idea when
yeah,
you qualify to replicate because you need to
yeah.
actually practice the skill of teaching. You don't need to
Mm-hmm,
create sequences. You just need to learn how to communicate to bodies in the room,
mm-hmm,
and then I think hopefully you find your own way. But then I think also kind of later on down the line as well, especially as you get older. I feel like I'm getting quite old now. But when you got like you actually then what you need personally in your body might not, I think, always reflect what you're actually teaching. So I've always taught as my main modality, kind of technical vinyasa, which is balancing flexibility and strength. But in the season of being a dad of two, my practices personally are quite restorative.
mm.
And I couldn't, of course, turn my vinyasa classes into restorative classes. I'd have no clients left. But at this season in my life, it's very, very different. And that might change again. Who
Mm,
knows?
mhm.
uh, Talking kind of more broadly now, kind of what brought you to yoga in the first place? Like you started, I think, at uni. Like
Mhm.
what brought you to it and what value did it seem to give to your life?
Really, I think I fell into it. I was just looking for something to. Actually, I'm not really sure what I was looking for. I started off with Pilates classes, and it was really like one day I just saw a yoga class and thought, okay, well, then let's see what that's about. And I think for me, because so many things came up and I sort of butted up against myself. And I thought, ooh, this is the first time I almost feel like I'm in a room and I'm sitting down with myself. And
Oh,
each
no.
time I get onto the mat, it's like I'm having a conversation with myself in ways that I've never had before. I'm starting to question, why do I feel that? Why do I feel that need? Why, where did that come from? And I think because I was finally starting to make connections and observe things that I'd never done before. I was like, there's so much here. This is a practice of understanding myself better. And there's not anything else in my life that's offering me that right now. And that's where it went. And that's how it's still going now.
And that was online stuff that you were doing at that point.
Yeah, that was online. That wasn't in person. I was a uni student. I couldn't go to a studio.
Yeah, no, of
I
course.
had a little corridor space in my uni house that I turned into my yoga space. So
And how
mm,
long did it take for it to become a significant part in your life?
months, it was really, really quite quick for me. I got into it very quickly. And then I was like, wow. I think it was one of those things almost like when you forget to brush your teeth and you go, oh, I missed that today. I feel like
Okay.
I noticed the difference. I should have done that. I started to pick up on that. Mm.
What misconceptions do you think people have about you, like as a yoga teacher?
Mm, probably the common ones. People tend to assume that you've got it all figured out when really you're just another person figuring it out. Um, I think there are a lot of misconceptions around maybe the way I eat or the way I drink or the way I live my life. But actually, I just live my life like a very normal person. But I am dedicated to the practice of studying myself. And I think that's the difference. Um, and I'm not sure. I've not given too much thought about what people might think of me. I don't know whether that's the healthiest thing
But I think
to
it is,
do.
especially as someone that has an online presence,
Yeah.
because everyone is very willing to share their opinion, as I'm sure you've experienced.
Mm.
What's your approach to that? We call them trolls or just people. Sometimes people say stuff with the best intentions, which can be very cruel and unkind. Yeah. So what's
Yeah.
your approach to dealing with that, whether it be on social media or YouTube?
Mm, actually, you know what? The people that write unkind comments are actually the people that I've learned the most from. And it's not even necessarily the unkind comments, but it's like the critique that I get from people. That's what makes me a better yoga teacher. Because even though it might be difficult to say, for example, if someone goes, "Oh, I didn't think that this was inclusive enough. I didn't think that this was truly what you said it was. I had an expectation and it didn't meet that." And then I have to go, okay, well, that's difficult to hear. But then also, what am I not doing? So I try to turn it around and be like, well, I don't need to get defensive here. It's not a personal hit, but what can I learn? What can I be better at? Um, but then, of course, there are some comments that aren't intended to be constructive criticism. They are just someone expressing an opinion and maybe not thinking that there's actually someone on the other side of that that's going to read that. So in that case, then I read it and I say to myself, is this going to be a big deal to me in 24 hours? If not, then don't think about it anymore. And that's how I deal with those difficult comments.
You don't stalk them, find out where they live, and then. Do you know, I did
No.
that once. Not stalk them, not literally stalk someone, but it was someone did like a satire of one of my posts.
Mm.
Didn't tag me in it, but somehow someone sent it to me, and it was full of like judgment and
Mm.
assumption about who I was, and actually it was quite nasty. And I
Mm.
couldn't help myself, but be like, who is this person?
Yeah.
And then I found their like personal account and found out they like worked for like a charity that was like about like looking after young people. And I was so close to like messaging. This is like 8 years ago. Messaging with charity, being like, actually, you got someone that works for you who is essentially online bullying.
Mm.
And you're a charity that works with young people. Now that was
Mm.
obviously very over the top. That was me practicing pure attachment. Now my view is I block and delete people and it'd be done. But I think yeah, what you say is very sensible. Like 24 hours,
Mm.
would I still worry about it? But coming back to what you said a little bit before, that you obviously you say you've learned a lot from people who maybe written some negative
Mhm.
comments like lack of inclusivity, etc. But are you ever concerned that you give sometimes that too much weight? So let's say, as an arbitrary number, the video gets 1,000 views, and it's very small, but let's say 1,000 views it gets, and you have 400 people doing a little thumbs up, two putting a thumbs down, a few comments being like, love this, very generic, nice, happy, woo. Maybe 90% of people don't leave a comment at all, of course. And then two people write a comment which is like, oh, well, it isn't really what I thought it would be, or that class is a little bit too short, and you rush Shavasana. Is it worth giving that one voice much of your attention? Because obviously it's so subjective as well.
Yeah, I have this conversation with myself a lot where I say it's very difficult because, especially when you're teaching to such a big audience, you do have to take the majority opinion as a gauge of whether, it's good or not. I do also pay attention to those few comments because I think even if this isn't an opinion that I necessarily agree with, is it something that I can take from? Like, can it inform future videos? But yeah, there is truth to that. You don't always have to take criticism from everyone. You don't have to take that on board. And I think, especially, I often think, is this someone whose opinion I value? I don't know, I don't know them. So you have to think about that as well, where it's like, well, for example, you've probably had this too. When I was coming up in the yoga world, I would never go to a yoga class and go to the teacher afterwards and say, well, I didn't think that you did this, or I didn't think that this was right.
Yeah.
Or, if the class was difficult, I would never go up to the teacher and say, you didn't make that easy enough for me. I'd just be like, yeah, that was challenging. And that was always my approach. But I do get some people that say, well, you didn't make that easy enough for me. And I think, well, to that, maybe you had a misconception around yoga being easy because it's not easy. It's not this gentle practice that people often assume that it is. So whenever I get this feedback, there's always so many conversations going on in my head where I weigh up, how much of it to take on board.
It's also, what promise did you make to that person? There was no financial
Yeah,
exchange directly. Had you
this is
promised them that
exactly,
it
this
was
is the
going to be an easy
thing.
class? Is that what it was described as?
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and as you say, people wouldn't say that in person, which is
Yeah.
just the internet full stop.
Mm-hmm.
Like, my view
Mm-hmm.
is always, would you say that if you were standing in front of me right now?
Mm-hmm.
And if I know someone wouldn't, then I ignore them. But then it comes then to something you said about opinions of a stranger. And I think that is so important that, like, if a yoga teacher came to my class and said, "Oh, I disagreed with that part of your sequence," or like, chances are I'd listen, but I'd take it with a pinch of salt, especially if they said, "Oh, and my teacher is X." I might think, well, actually, I completely disagree with everything X teaches and their views and anatomy. So actually, if anything, what you just said is a compliment to me, because it means I'm definitely not doing what they would teach. And I would only really listen to feedback from people who are senior in my lineage or related lineage, and that's it. Okay, I might take some feedback on room temperature or volume, or if my class numbers are consistently going down for 3 years in a row.
Mm.
But
Mm.
in terms of direct feedback about the content I'm teaching, I'm generally going to ignore feedback, good or bad.
Mm.
And I think that is, it can be valuable. It can be hard to do that,
Mm.
but I think it can be
Mm-hmm.
valuable. So I think actually almost making a list mentally of the people that you would happily take feedback from, it can be worth it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And who were your teachers? What is your lineage?
So my first teacher was Video Heisel at the
Oh,
Frog
video.
Lotus Yoga.
We
Yeah,
had her on
yeah,
the
yeah.
podcast ages ago. I've known her
Did
for years.
you?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. She was my first teacher. I did my 200-hour with her. And then I went on to do, I don't know if you know Sandra, she was a forest yoga guardian. I don't think she's a forest yoga guardian anymore,
Yeah,
but I
people
did.
tend to leave it.
Well, I did some training with Sandra and I did some anatomy training with Jambo as well.
Oh, Jamba Sword. Okay, cool.
Jambo's great. I love him. He makes anatomy so much fun. So yeah, those are my teachers, and I think because they all come from quite different backgrounds as well. I've had quite a broad teaching view.
How would you feel if, like, Jumbo said, "Oh, I might watch one of your classes tonight. I might do one of your classes." What would be like your gut reaction to that?
I mean, I always get nervous when my teachers do anything of mine. Like a couple of years ago, I went to go and volunteer at Surya Lila, and I was there for 3 months. And I remember one morning, I was teaching in the morning, and we'd had a party the night before because somebody was leaving, so I'd been awake quite late, and I was up teaching the next morning, so I wasn't as prepared as I would have liked to have been. And it was the first class that Vidya was going to see of me teaching since she'd graduated me like many years before. So I was very nervous. And in her way, she didn't really say anything. She just, I think she privately said to somebody else, like, yeah, it was all right. And then that got back to me. But yeah, I get very nervous when it doesn't matter who the teacher is. I want them to enjoy the experience, and I respect any teacher. So, you know.
I guess it's almost scary online because these people can watch it without you actually knowing.
Yeah.
That makes it a little bit more intimidating. Or even you go to future trainings and they check you out first.
Yeah.
Oh, who is she? There's no barrier to entry. They have to at least pay for the online platform or like. Uh,
Mm,
on that note, on the kind of online platforms, etc. And I know, of course, at your point you monetize YouTube.
mm,
Not like you as an individual monetize. Like, that's part of the model.
mm,
But then you also sell your online programs as well.
mm.
How do you make sure that you're not giving so much away for free that people wouldn't sign up for your online programs? Like, how do you balance that?
The simplest way to explain it is that the YouTube is really just for a day-to-day practice. It's just more for consistency. The programs are for people who want to develop their practice beyond the day-to-day. So for people who are really interested in learning specific skills, that's where the programs lie. And then for people who just want to move their body, to tune in with their body, their breath. That's where the YouTube classes are. And of course, there's a little bit of crossover from time to time. I will include tutorials on YouTube that might cover some of the things, just not in as much depth. I think that's the key thing is that the programs are really in depth. The YouTube classes, they're just surface level.
Nice way to think of it. Let's do some slightly kind of quicker fire questions now. Any failures you've had in this journey that have then actually turned into successes in the end?
Oh, yeah. So a couple of years ago, I paid a lot of money to have a subscription site built, and I was going to go down that road. It turned out to be the best thing ever when it all went horribly wrong. And it ended up costing me loads of money, and I still wasn't left over with, I still didn't have a website that I could use. And I'm so happy I didn't go down that route because now I have YouTube. And I don't have to worry about YouTube. Google will fix it if anything
Yeah.
goes wrong. So, it's quite carefree in that way.
What is the simplest way to describe your kind of philosophy of life?
Mm, gosh. And this was a quick fire question.
Good, yeah. So in a few words, describe your philosophy of life. Yeah.
I think for me, the most important thing is just to stay open to learning. Just, never be closed off to anything. Always be open to the possibility that you can learn.
Right.
Mm.
How would you define like success now for you?
Oh, success is having the freedom to be able to do the things you want to do.
Hmm. I like that. Like Naval, I don't know if you come across this guy. Naval is like an investor and philosopher, but his view is that money is only valuable to the point it gives you the freedom to do the things you want to do,
Mm-hmm.
which I
Mm-hmm.
think is a really nice way of looking at it. Uh, Anything under £100 that you've bought for your YouTube journey that you'd massively recommend?
I'm going through a mental list of all of my kit now. Technical wise, no, I wouldn't say so. But a little black book, just like, a
Okay.
little notebook. This is my second brain. Any ideas go into there. When I'm filming, I write my edit notes in there so that when I go back and I edit, I know anything that needs to be amended or changed. Yeah, a little black book. I recommend
Cool.
it for anyone.
And just shout out to a book by Tiago Forte called Second Brain. So
Yeah, I've
look
got
at
it on my bookshelf.
that. Which I read it, really liked it, but it doesn't really work for my head. I implementing new systems just couldn't work for me.
Mm.
Now, what's your favourite focal length for filming classes?
Ooh, I love to shoot between 60 mil to 70. So I get really far away because
Okay.
I want that beautiful bokeh background.
And are you Sony, Fuji? I would say
No,
Nikon,
no,
but I'm guessing you're not a Nikon.
no, I'm a Canon
How are
person.
you?
Mm.
Oh, I saw someone do like an AI modeling of what each camera band user looks like. Uh, and there was, I think, a bit of half truth in it. I'm a Fuji.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
a Fuji hipster. Cool. And now let us know where people can find you and what you've got going on.
Um, Join me on YouTube for day-to-day classes. Come and join me for a program on my website, charliefollows.com, if you want to take your practice a little bit further. And on all of the relevant social media channels, just search my name, Charlie Follows, you'll find me.
And I think your surname just works so well for this, doesn't it?
I know. I think some people think that it's not my real name. I've had
Yeah.
several emails for people saying, "So what is your actual name?" And I'm like, Yeah, Charlie follows.
It just works so well for this. And I could even do like a little like YouTube series of Charlie follows
Yeah,
David.
where am
Just
I
what it
going?
called.
Yeah.
And it works. So I think there's something to be said in that. There's something to be said of having a strong name that can
Mm,
help you in any career that's public facing. Like I think
mm.
Hustler has
Oh
really helped
yeah,
me.
for
And
sure.
and then my wife being called then Holly Hustler. I didn't impose
Hmm.
my name on her. She just really thought it was cool, so fancied taking
Yeah.
my surname. I think
Hmm.
it's really helped her as well. Cool. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Honestly unbalanced.